Hello and welcome to the Daily Politics. Labour promises to scrap Theresa May's Brexit plans and unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU residents if it wins the general election. The party's shadow Brexit secretary, Keir Starmer, joins us live. Less than a year ago, party loyalties were abandoned as MPs fought together to remain in the European Union. Today, Remain supporting Conservatives quit the anti-Brexit group Open Britain over plans to target Brexit-supporting Tories in the election. Plaid Cymru launched their election campaign today with a pledge to protect Wales from a Conservative Party intent on gaining powers as a result of Brexit. We'll hear from their leader, Leanne Wood. And what makes a good teacher?
Strict teachers can be annoying and some students find them annoying, but it's best to get it over with because sometimes when you're older and you progress, you will have bosses you don't like.
All that in the next hour. With us for the whole of the programme today, Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former Chief Inspector of Schools in England. Welcome to the programme.
Hello.
So it's exactly 1 week since Theresa May called the snap election. So, Michael, are you feeling pumped up and excited about it?
I'm afraid I'm not.
Why not?
I like elections, but it's not so long ago that we had an election. I can fully understand why the Prime Minister Theresa May wants to go to the country again. She's 24 points ahead in the opinion polls. If I was her, I'd probably want a huge majority, particularly in terms of what's going to happen.
So you didn't buy her line that it was about the opposition to Brexit?
No, I think she wants a big majority. This is a fantastic time to go to the country at a time when the polls in Wales show that the Conservatives are in the lead. Amazing. And in Scotland, they're forecasting that the Tories will win, 10 seats. There's never been a better time for a Prime Minister of a Conservative Party to go to the country.
What's going to swing your vote? Will it be more about the issues on things like public services, as Jeremy Corbyn says he will be campaigning on?
I think it'll be that. I'll be very interested in what all the parties are going to say about Europe, because that's going to capture everyone's attention over the next 2 years. I'll be interested in that. But at the end of the day, I think I, like most other voters, will be interested in the whole panoply of issues, which is the health service, education, adult social care, the economy. And, is the party united? Are the parties united? And the thing about the Conservatives is that it's a united party with a strong leader. And unfortunately, the Labour Party is disunited with what everyone sees as a rather weak leader.
Well, we'll find out certainly on the subjects of Brexit and education in this programme. Now, it's time for our daily quiz, and the question for today is which politician has announced they are resigning from their party and will stand as an independent candidate in an upcoming election? Is it A, Tony Blair, B, Angela Merkel, C, Marine Le Pen, or D, Nigel Farage? At the end of the show, Michael will hopefully give us the correct answer. Now, Labour's shadow Brexit secretary, Keir Starmer, has given a keynote speech this morning setting out the party's position on Brexit. This comes as party grandees like Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson have criticised the current leadership for not having sufficiently clear policies on Brexit. This is what Keir Starmer had to say. If elected in June, Labour would scrap the government's Brexit white paper and replace it with a new Brexit strategy. The new strategy would, according to Keir Starmer, focus on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union in order to protect jobs and the economy. A Labour government would also unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU nationals living in the UK on their very first day in office. Labour would also drop the Great Repeal Bill. That's the government's planned legislation which aims to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act and also convert current EU law into UK law. Instead, Labour would bring forward a new EU rights and protections bill. According to Keir Starmer, this bill would safeguard workers' rights and environmental protections. And I'm happy to say Keir Starmer is here with us now. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Now, there seemed to be a lot of talk about process in your speech today. I listened to pretty well all of it. Would it be fair to say that you and the government have virtually the same policy objectives when it comes to Brexit?
No. We are putting jobs and the economy first. The Prime Minister is putting immigration first, and that's a really fundamental difference. Now, I've never underplayed the importance of immigration. I've never suggested that the referendum didn't have tied up with it the question of freedom of movement. It's a major factor. I've never suggested that freedom of movement doesn't need to change. But it is a very odd situation indeed when immigration is elevated to a priority above the economy and drives the Prime Minister's approach.
Right.
And it has driven her approach.
But that's tone and that's emphasis. In terms of policies, what are the differences? Because if we look at your decision to go unilaterally for guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens, but the government has said that that is going to be a priority. It's crucial. They back it wholeheartedly. So the end result will be both parties guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens who are here in the UK.
I think there's a fundamental difference between unilaterally making the decision on day one that that's what you're going to do and saying we will have it as a priority in the negotiations. What the Prime Minister can't do is to give any guarantee that this will be resolved until the 2 years is up. She cannot do that.
Are you suggesting that people will be deported in any way?
No,
are you suggesting that the rights of... Well, then in the end, the policy objective is the same.
I really don't think it helps to undermine the genuine concern that millions of people have in this country. We've all seen them in tears, etc. And simply to revert to, well, they'll, are you saying they'll be deported? Of course I'm not, but they're anxious. I've got people saying to me, well, what is my status going to be? What sort of time will I be allowed? What do I do with my children? What's my rights, etc. They're genuinely concerned about it. The major difference, it's a big difference. Will you unilaterally take this action on day one, or will you put it in the mix with no guarantee that it's going to be resolved for 2 years?
But when you say there's no guarantee, the implication there is that those rights of EU citizens to remain in the UK with the same sorts of life that they have now will not happen under a Tory government in Brexit negotiations, when they've made it very, very clear that this is going to be a priority in the negotiations. So it may not be day one, but it could be 2 months down the line. And the end result will be the same as yours.
I absolutely accept that the Prime Minister and David Davis are committed to protecting the rights of EU citizens. But I really think that to underestimate the anxiety and concern that there is about when this is going to be resolved, and that's why we will unilaterally take this action on day one. It's a policy decision open to the Prime Minister. She's refused to take it to date, and she's not said she'll do it after. Now, just let me complete on this, because people say, well, in which case you're not concerned about UK citizens in the EU. That is completely not true. Of course we're concerned about them.
Except they might not reciprocate, of course.
They're equally anxious about their position. But I genuinely think, from very many conversations I've had across Europe, that if we took that unilateral action, it would be the quickest way to solve this impasse, to resolve it overall.
Let's look at another policy objective that you outlined in your speech. You're going to scrap the government's Brexit white paper and replace it with a new strategy that will focus on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union. How is that different to the government's negotiating objective, which David Davis said is for frictionless trade and having exactly the same benefits as we currently have? They're the same.
What we're saying is businesses must be able to succeed in the future in the way they've succeeded in the past. Now, you'd say, well, anybody would say that, and right they would. The question is, what sort of approach are you going to take to achieve that? What the government has done, because it's put immigration as its number one priority, is to take virtually all other options off the table. So any arrangement with the single market's off the table. Any arrangement with the customs unions off the table.
You say you still want the UK to be in the single market?
Let me complete the list. Any relationship with the European Court of Justice, even where disputes have to be resolved, is off the table. Even coming out some of the agencies such as Europol and Eurojust, agencies that I've worked with, which do effective work in countering crime, they're all off the table because the priorities are wrong. And we're saying, have the right priorities, leave options on the table. Now, I'm not pretending that unreformed or the single market membership can go hand in hand with my acceptance that freedom of movement has to change.
Right, has to change, because that's very important, because you said you haven't underestimated that immigration was an important part for many people of this whole debate and the vote. Does freedom of movement end, in your mind, under Labour's policy on Brexit?
Yes.
Right,
But it doesn't mean no movement. Of course it does, because it's an EU rule, and we've said it has to come to an end. I've said on numerous occasions the status quo has to change.
Except you didn't say it in your speech. You said it had to change.
Immigration, well, Immigration rules have to change. I repeat, immigration rules have to change. I've said, I don't know how many times in the last 6 months, that freedom of movement is coming to an end and that the status quo is unsustainable. I've said over and over again.
So
we've also said...
Why is that message not getting across, do you think? Because people aren't completely clear on what you're saying, and you barely mentioned it in your speech today. You say we recognise that immigration rules have to change. You didn't say or reiterate, even if you've said it in the past, that in your mind, freedom of movement, in terms of the EU, is coming to an end.
Well, because it's obvious that
right.
it's coming to an end and the rules must change. But I really think it's not fair of you to construe it as if that's not been the consistent thing I've been saying for 6 months.
You may have been saying it consistently, but not everybody in the Labour Party. Well, and actually, let's just have a listen to Peter Mandelson, a senior figure from the Labour Party, who said this in response to questions about Labour Party policy on Brexit.
What is the Labour position on Brexit now?
Well, search me. I mean, I think you need to wait for the manifesto. I mean, the problem for the Labour Party in this election on Brexit is very clear, and that is that they are not, I'm afraid, differentiating their position and their policy sufficiently from the government, or haven't done so up until now, which they needed to do if they were going to offer the voters a clear choice.
Which is along the lines that I've been asking you in terms of clear policy differences between you and the government. I accept that the process may be different in terms of getting to those objectives that you have outlined, the tone and the emphasis, but in terms of policy objectives, they're pretty much the same. I mean, does the Labour Party want to stay in the customs union?
You just rattled through the 5 or 6 things that we said we would do pretty well immediately, which are a change of position for the government. So to say they're precisely the same is contrary to everything that's said at the top of your programme. As far as the customs union is concerned, if you're in the manufacturing sector, there is huge concern about coming out of the customs union. Now, the government said we're not even prepared to contemplate staying in it or even to talk about amending it. We say leave it on the table. It may be that we can't stay in the customs union and a judgment call is going to have to be made at the end of the exercise. But what the Prime Minister has done is to clear all of the options off the table before we've started. We say it's insensible in negotiations to give yourself maximum flexibility, to be smart about the way you negotiate. What we've ended up with this Prime Minister is a rigid and reckless approach where viable options have just been swept off the table, are simply not there to even be discussed anymore.
Right. You talked then about the customs union. If we don't leave the customs union, then what would happen to the ability to do free trade deals?
I appreciate that. But we need to focus on the EU trade deal, which is 44% of our trade, and get the right trading arrangement. We need to look at the customs union as well and see at the end of the exercise where we are on both of those issues. But what the government has done is say we'd take the customs union off the table altogether. That's a judgment call when we know what deal we've done with the EU so far as EU trade is concerned. And I'm not suggesting that nothing can ever change or should change. What I am saying is, if you take options off the table, you can't even come back to them in 2 years, where it makes good sense that that would be the position you ended up in.
In an election, though, the messages have to be clear, don't they? And I understand this is a complicated process, and having a more nuanced message or one that needs a bit of explanation, which may be totally credible, is more difficult to get across to voters in an election.
But it's very easy to get across the idea that you're taking all the options off the table. The real question on the table is, what best guarantees the right outcome for our country? Because that matters much more than anything else.
All right, well, let's have a look at workers' rights just briefly before we come to an end. You want to replace the government's Great Repeal Bill with a new EU Rights and Protections Bill. What's the difference apart from the title?
Well, first, the government has said it will protect workplace rights. I accept that.
Right.
It's been a bit looser about environmental rights, consumer rights, and it says it won't protect human rights. So there's a difference there.
They said they won't protect human rights.
Yes, so far as the Charter of Fundamental Rights is concerned, they said that's not going to be in their bill. But secondly, we have to look at what's going to happen in this election. If there's a Tory government return with a majority, the temptation to row back on this and not to fully implement these rights.
Right, so you don't believe them, which is fine. You don't believe that the Tories will actually uphold their commitment. But what is the difference between the Great Repeal Bill, which is going to take all this EU law, and then there will be a decision further down the line as to which bits of legislation they're going to keep, and your EU Rights and Protections Bill, if we take what the government takes at face value, which is they say they are going to protect workers'
This is a clear entrenchment of the full list of rights, along with the means of enforcing them that aren't in the current proposals, and it is a guarantee against rolling back here. And that guarantee will not be available after the election if there's a Tory majority. Half the cabinet, I mean, Priti Patel in the cabinet was campaigning the referendum on the basis she wanted to halve workplace rights, halve social rights. These are people in the cabinet now. We are absolutely right to say this is a point of distinction, and we want to introduce legislation which will entrench these rights and point out a fundamental difference.
Keir Starmer, thank you very much. I think we can listen now to Damien Green, the Work and Pensions Secretary, on his views to what Keir Starmer has had to say today.
It's completely incoherent, the Labour position. They're saying that they wouldn't accept no deal, which means they would have to go into these negotiations saying, whatever happens, we will do a deal at the end of it. That's not a strong negotiating stance at the start of what will be a long and complex negotiation. And it's characteristic of the weak and incoherent leadership that Jeremy Corbyn provides the Labour Party and the coalition of chaos that lies behind us with the other parties, that they can't come up with a basic negotiating plan that will stand any scrutiny.
Well, that was Damien Green. We're joined now by the Conservative MP Dominic Raab and by Alistair Carmichael for the Liberal Democrats. Welcome, gentlemen. Before I come to you, your impressions there of what Keir Starmer has said. Do you see the clear differences between what Labour is offering in terms of Brexit negotiations if they were to win the election compared to the Conservatives?
No, I don't. And I suppose one of the central issues, and I speak as a sort of layperson in this and not a politician, is on something as central to the future of this country as the negotiations on Europe. Why isn't the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, making a statement about this? Why isn't he talking about this issue? Why has he left it to Keir Starmer?
Well, he is, of course, the person doing the Brexit
and I suppose,
brief.
you know, when you look back over the referendum issue and the lead into the referendum, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, went AWOL, went missing on this. And, you know, he said that the Labour Party was for remaining in Europe, but his private position was very, very unclear.
Right,
and
although two-thirds of Labour voters did, in the end, broadly
yes,
speaking,
absolutely.
back Remain.
And I think voters actually make their own decisions on that.
All right. Welcome to both of you again. Dominic Raab, first of all, do you think Labour's Brexit objectives, having heard what Keir Starmer has said today, are actually extremely similar to your own in terms of the end game? And it shows that then Jeremy Corbyn could be a very credible Prime Minister on the issue of Brexit.
Nice try, Joe. Look, Keir Starmer has been banging on for months that we need a clear, detailed plan. The government's produced one. He said he would scrap it, but hold on, we're not going to tell you what Labour would do until after the election. I think the much bigger issue for any voter is going to be who do you want going into bat in these negotiations with Jean-Claude Juncker, with Angela Merkel? Is it the weak leadership of Jeremy Corbyn or the strong, experienced leadership of Theresa May?
Well, we know that the Tories want to paint the election in that way. They want to pit, obviously, Theresa May versus Jeremy Corbyn in exactly
the plan.
Well, hang on, but when we come to the plan, I cannot see any material difference. David Davis, as I said to Keir Starmer, wants his Brexit deal to deliver exactly the same benefits that we currently have. So, for example, in terms of the single market and the customs union, he wants to retain all those benefits. Keir Starmer has said he wants to do exactly the same. So there's no difference between what you're saying and what Labour is saying.
Well, Joe, the difference is this. You're right to say there's fudge on Labour's part, but we've set out a white paper in detail all of our approach. You had 2,000 words. It could have been an op-ed in a paper from Keir Starmer saying, wait until after the election, we'll fill in the gaps then, and that is the difference. And we know that the plan Theresa May has set out for post-Brexit Britain has attracted strong support from the public. They want to see us rally behind the government, get the best deal, and every vote for the Conservatives will strengthen our chances of getting the best deal.
But it's the same as Labour's, basically, in terms of the policy.
No,
well, we do know they want to unilaterally. Well, they want to make a unilateral move. Let me finish. Let me finish.
2,000 words.
You can keep hammering home your election messages, but what voters will want to know is there anything different in terms of the two parties' approach? Well, we do on certain things that we've just gone through, and they're the same as far as people can see. Alistair Carmichael, if Theresa May wins this election, will you finally accept that she has a mandate to take the UK out of the single market?
We are looking for our own mandate in this election, so I mean that's what this election is all about. And I think you've made a fair point today that as far as the Labour position is concerned, Keir Starmer has come up with something that is a distinction without a difference, quite frankly. It is going in the same direction. They've been fairly clever about it because the Labour Party has this difficulty that a big chunk of the seats that they represent in the current Parliament voted to leave, whereas they as a party were in favour of remaining. And now they're trying to face both ways. And what they've done today is
Which the Liberal Democrats would never do.
Never, ever, as you well know, Joe. But what you've seen today is somebody who is in his heart a pro-European internationalist having to come forward and preach a fairly nationalist sermon.
You know, not that I want to put words into Labour Party people's mouths, but he would say he is offering something that is a bit softer than the Conservatives. He's accepted the result that Brexit is going to happen, but he is offering different priorities. When
it mattered in the Houses of Parliament when we were looking at the bill to trigger Article 50, the Labour Party simply folded in the House of Lords. So you get a commitment today. Keir Starmer saying this is our day one commitment to preserve the rights of EU nationals. When it really mattered, Labour peers just went home and abstained.
Well, that is a firm policy position, though, to take, and that is different to the government's. But just to be clear, you will accept, if Theresa May wins this election, that she will have a mandate to take the UK out of the single market and that she will also have a mandate to complete the Brexit process without putting the terms of the deal to the people in a second referendum.
We shall see exactly what the outcome of this election is.
Sure, but I'm just saying, in that scenario that she wins, would you accept that?
The scenario that I want to talk about, and I think it's legitimate to talk about at the moment, is the need for the second vote, or the vote on the deal when we get to know it. And actually, that will still be right, whatever the outcome of this election.
Right.
So I will still believe in that.
So you'll support the second referendum.
Right. I mean, the referendum on the deal.
Theresa May has blamed the likes of Alistair Carmichael and Keir Starmer for frustrating the process, her negotiating hand, and that's why she had to call this snap election. But we know that's completely bogus now, don't we? Because they didn't block Article 50 being triggered, and there was nothing getting in the way of her Brexit negotiating stance.
No, I don't think that's true.
Well, there is. How many times were you defeated in Parliament?
Well, we managed to get it through, but it had nerves jangling, and we know that we've got...
Well, nerves jangling is not quite the same.
And we've got a heavy legislative agenda with the Great Repeal Bill. We've heard from Keir Starmer he would scrap it, he said. He would scrap the key thing which will take back democratic control. And the Lib Dem position is not only we don't... Hold on, Alistair, I listen to you respectfully. Not only we don't respect the referendum, we're not going to respect the outcome of this election, and we want to sabotage the Brexit negotiations. So I think, frankly, the worst possible outcome would be Jeremy Corbyn propped up by the saboteurs.
But on the main question, jangling of nerves is not the same as blocking the Brexit process. Alistair Carmichael, you want to respond? You tried to?
You have a majority at the moment. You know, if, as Joe's very fairly pointed out, you had no difficulty really getting the Article 50 bill through. If your case is strong enough, you should be able, with the majority you've got, to get it through Parliament.
We've got a majority of 17. I don't think any government in our position going into these negotiations would not want a stronger man.
Dominic. You've got the DUP on your side as well. You've got a healthy working majority. There has been no point where you've really come. But thanks to the Labour Party and the weakness of the opposition you get from them, there's been no point where you've come under any real threat.
And there'll be a problem for you, for the Liberal Democrats, in areas like the South West, where at one time you were very strongly represented. But, of course, many of those areas, in those constituencies in the South West, many people there voted Leave. And actually, how much chance do you really think you have of winning back those seats?
Well, all the signals that we get coming from the campaigns in the South West are that there is a real resurgence in Liberal Democrat fortunes down in that neck of the woods. It's as far away from my own constituency where I've been campaigning as it is possible to get, but everything I hear is very positive. And of course, it has to be said, and I think it would be accepted, that elections, whatever you say about them, are never actually on any one single issue, and there will always be other local factors that will have a bearing.
Just before I let you go, Dominic Raab, you will know a string of high-profile Conservative MPs have reportedly withdrawn their support from the Open Britain group because that organisation is going to be targeting some pro-Brexit Conservative MPs at this election, people like Nicky Morgan and Anna Soubry. Do you welcome that?
Well, look, I think it's important now, and Nicky and Anna have been very thoughtful contributors to this debate, albeit from a different perspective from me. I think it's important now for us all to rally behind the United Kingdom's negotiation so we can get the very best deal. So I do welcome it, but ultimately that's for others to worry about. And I respect Nicky and I respect Anna. They've been very thoughtful contributors to this debate.
And do you feel the same about Stephen Dorrell, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister? He is still supporting the campaign in his role as chair of the European movement. What do you say to him?
I say to everyone in this country, come on, Time for the political haggling to end. Let's get behind the government and behind the country in securing the very best deal for the whole country. And to be honest with you, these campaign groups or the Liberal Democrats trying to scupper or sabotage these negotiations just make the risk of getting no deal more likely.
Are you calling him a saboteur? Is that the term you're going to use?
The Lib Dem policy is to...
No, because we don't agree with
Tim
you
Farron
doesn't make
said
us a
he
saboteur.
wants to grind this government to a halt. It's not particularly constructive, is
It's
it?
called opposition, Dominic.
Grinding to a halt.
You don't get it from the Labour Party. You do get it from the Liberal Democrats. You clearly don't like it, but it's part of being in government. So suck it up and get on with it.
Oh well, and on that,
It's not
I'll leave you with your two
the
messages.
United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. So, as we've just been talking about today, several Conservative MPs have quit a cross-party anti-Brexit group. Let's talk now to the former Conservative MP, Stephen Dorrell, who chairs the European Movement. Welcome to the programme. Stephen Dorrell, but I suppose it was inevitable, wasn't it? Once you start targeting Tory MPs in an election, Brexiteers or not, the Conservative MPs who support Open Britain were going to withdraw their support.
I do understand why it's difficult for people who have who are carrying the party label as official candidates in the election. I understand why that's difficult, but I don't think it changes the nature of the argument we're making to voters, which is that this election is unlike any previous elections in my lifetime. In addition to the normal factors you take into account in a general election vote, that's the party label and also the nature of the candidate locally, we also think there is this hugely important issue of this country's future relationship with Europe, where views do, as a matter of fact, unavoidable fact, cut across party lines. And our argument is that individual voters, in making their choice about the candidate who will be their Member of Parliament, should ask whether this individual will apply on an open-minded basis the test during and after the negotiation, or at the end of the negotiating process, which is the best route forward for Britain? Is it to leave on the Prime Minister's terms? Is it to leave without agreement? Or is it to remain within the EU?
But in the end, Stephen Dorrell, this is an election, you say, which trumps party politics, but we have a first-past-the-post system and people are still elected on party labels. So your campaign's doomed, really.
No, I don't think it is doomed because, look, everybody knows that individual members of Parliament have personal votes that they pick up because of their record locally that has nothing to do with their party label. This election is unlike other elections in that, in addition to the party label and the local following of members of Parliament, there's a third dimension to it, which is what is going to be the attitude of this individual candidate, if elected to the House of Commons, in holding the government to account through and at the end of this critically important negotiation process. What I want to ensure is that there isn't a one-dimensional view in the House of Commons.
But I'm talking about the sort of practical logic of your argument. I mean, you say you cannot, as a Conservative, support candidates from your own party who support Brexit or hard Brexit, which means you cannot support Mrs May.
Well, I'm not a constituent of Mrs May, so
that
issue doesn't arise. And the point that I'm seeking to highlight to the members of the European Movement, but of course much more generally, is that when voters cast their vote, yes, they're electing a Member of Parliament, a government, I should say, but they're also electing a Member of Parliament who will have this critical duty during the next Parliament to hold the government to account and to insist, as I hope they will, on an open-minded review of where Britain's interests lie in the light of this negotiation.
But what about your loyalty to your party, to the Conservative Party and the line that they are following? If you are going to be targeting Conservative MPs whom you disagree with on the issue of Brexit, are you actually advocating supporting Lib Dems and Labour? I mean, that could result in your expulsion from the Conservative Party.
Well, my individual position, I don't think matters very much in this.
Well, it does. You're chairing this. You're chairing this movement.
What matters is the message to voters that when you're casting your vote, of course, as I've already said, I believe Mrs May will be will be Prime Minister after the election. I hope she is, but I hope also that the next House of Commons will be made up of people who insist that the negotiating process doesn't simply hark back to the referendum and say you must accept what we say, but actually insists that there's an open-minded review of where Britain's interests lie when we know what the real choices are.
Right. What do you say, Michael Wilshaw? Do you think this campaign is going to have any traction?
I think, you know, voters, when they vote next month, will be looking at a wide range of issues and not just this one. And they won't be saying to themselves, is this member of, or prospective member of Parliament a soft Brexiteer or a hard Brexiteer? They'll vote on a whole range of different issues. And I think, you know, the election of Macron in a few weeks' time, and I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, yes, we don't know yet.
We don't know yet, but we think that's what's going to happen. And Merkel in Germany, if that happened and Europe stabilises and the European economy prospers, there's no reason for Europe to give an inch on the negotiations. And that could spell bad news for Britain, bad news for trade and all the rest of it. And I think, you know, the more I think about it, if things go badly in the negotiations, there is every reason to go back to the country. So I would support that move by the Liberal Democrats to say, if the negotiations go badly for Britain, then I think the people need to look at it and need to vote again.
All right. Stephen Dorrell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Today, as Theresa May visits South Wales on the campaign trail up in the north of the nation, Plaid Cymru is officially launching their campaign, saying they are the only party who can defend Wales as the UK heads into Brexit negotiations. And their leader, Leanne Woods, joins us from Bangor. Welcome back to the programme. You said you're in defensive mode. Sounds like your party and you are on the back foot.
The country that I live in, Wales, faces some serious dangers in the coming years as the Brexit negotiations unfold. If we're pulled out of the single market, there are real threats to jobs and to people's livelihoods. And there is even, you could argue, a threat to the existence of our very nation. So this is about survival for us. We have to defend what we have. We believe that the Tories want to take powers away from our National Assembly. And so this election for us is all about defending Wales.
Right. I mean, you said it's a threat to the survival of Wales. If that is the case, do you back the idea of a progressive alliance to stop the Conservatives winning seats in Wales?
I've previously said that we should do all that we can to try to reduce the number of seats that the Tories are able to win in Wales. We need to do two things. We need to increase the number of Plaid Cymru MPs and we need to reduce the number of Tory MPs. My problem is that since the Brexit referendum, Labour have failed to stand up for Wales. They've been too interested in their own infighting and their own divisions to stand up for the Welsh national interest.
So you wouldn't do a deal with Labour?
To do that.
So you wouldn't do a deal with Labour or the Greens or the Liberal Democrats in Wales to keep out the Tories?
I've previously suggested cooperation to do that, and that idea has not gone anywhere. But now we have to focus on making sure that this election returns the maximum number of Plaid Cymru MPs, because that's the only way Wales will have a strong voice in Westminster after this election.
But if that's the case, and you look at the latest opinion poll, which I'm sure you have seen, it is one poll, but it was pretty startling in terms of how the Conservatives might do in Wales. It indicated they might get a majority in Wales for the first time in, well, something like over 100 years. Isn't it the best chance to stop a Brexit deal and to save Wales actually getting in with Labour to make sure that the Tories don't win any more seats?
The Tories are on a roll. The poll that came out yesterday shows that they're ahead, but we've got 6 weeks to go before the end of this election. People in Wales would do well to remember the Tories' record. I grew up in the valleys in the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister and she decimated the coal industry. And today we are still paying the price for that. And we've had Labour representation for many, many years. They've failed to pull us out of the economic mess that we've been in, and the Tories now, with an increased mandate, risk making things even worse.
Well, then why are they capitalising? Why are they capitalising, Leanne Woods, on Labour's difficulties and struggles and not you?
Well, let's see. We've yet to have the election campaign yet. There have been lots of problems with polls in recent times. There's an actual real poll on May the 4th. Plaid Cymru is looking to do well in a number of areas, and so it's that poll that I'm more interested than anything else.
Right, and you're worried about the effect of Brexit and the Brexit negotiations, but Wales did vote, albeit by a small majority, to leave. That makes it difficult for you in this campaign, doesn't it?
Wales did vote to leave, but people didn't vote to lose all our funding. People didn't vote to lose jobs or put those jobs at risk. People didn't vote for a hard or a Tory extreme Brexit.
Yes, but if the Conservatives, if that poll becomes true, then that's exactly what they're going to be voting for in your mind. If they do actually put their cross next to the Conservative candidates and the Conservatives become the biggest party, will you accept that is what Wales wants?
Well, that's exactly why people shouldn't vote Conservative, isn't it? It risks our country, it risks people's livelihoods. I would say there's a better option. For all of those Labour voters who are fed up with being taken advantage of, if you like, by their party, Labour have accepted people's votes and wanted, you could have weighed Labour votes in some places in the valleys in Wales in the past, and many people now are wanting to move away from Labour because they see that they're unable to form any kind of a government. So it's Plaid Cymru's opportunity now, and it's only Plaid Cymru that will stand up and defend Wales.
Leanne Woods, thank you very much. Now, I need to mind my P's and Q's because I've got a headmaster, or a former headmaster, sitting next to me. And not just any headmaster. Until last year, Sir Michael Wilshaw was the Chief Inspector of Schools in England. So he ought to know a thing or two about what makes a good school. Well, you'd hope so. But some have questioned whether the watchdog he used to head up, Ofsted, has the right approach. Here's Ellie.
All parents want to give their kids a head start in life.
Sit!
But it's not always a level playing field. So what makes a successful school? I went to one in Kent, where instead of a school bell, they play Vivaldi, so pupils know how long they've got to get from one lesson to another.
So 3 years ago, the headline figure of a number of GCSEs, including English, Maths, C and above, was they got 24%, and last summer we got 56%, which is rapid and a radical, actually, increase in those results within just 3 years.
As well as hoiking up exam results, the school, which became an academy in 2013, also received a good rating from Ofsted following its most recent inspection. So, is that what a school needs to make the grade?
The Ofsted report and the results don't tell the full story of a school. There's lots and lots of elements. Of course, there's reputation, although reputation as well can be double-edged because good reputations can linger when their sell-by date is gone, and poor reputations can linger when the school has been transformed, like we have. There's the ease with which you can recruit teachers. And something that's really important to me, and I've said this from day one, is that children enjoy coming to school and that they feel safe and happy in school.
Ofsted inspectors do now take more factors into account when assessing and rating. But some experts say there's an inherent unfairness against schools whose pupils come from more challenging backgrounds.
If you're focusing on schools getting high numbers of pupils with GCSE results and that being closely linked with Ofsted outcomes, then that's fair. If you're more interested in the rate of progress that pupils are making and their performance in context of taking into account levels of disadvantage and so on, it would suggest from the data that Ofsted outcomes at the moment aren't fair.
Once you start talking about unfairness, you're in danger of becoming a bit bleaty and a bit making excuses, which I'm not. But as I say, I would just pose the question to judge one school which has a very, very different makeup in terms of the background and the affluence and the support of the families against a school where it is radically different. I just think it should have some questions raised.
You need to be thinking about questions that will improve, that you can ask to improve this product.
But maybe it's the pupils who have the answer to what makes a good school.
You should be able to share your opinion with the teachers and not feel closed up.
I think the teachers need to push you and make you drive and take into consideration what your ambitions are and what you aspire to be after what you do when you leave school.
Strict teachers can be annoying and some students find them annoying, but it's best to get it over with because sometimes when you're older and you progress, you will have bosses you don't like or people you don't like.
And maybe that's another measure, learning those valuable life lessons early.
So very wise, those pupils in that film. Ellie Price reporting, and Sir Michael Wilshaw, former Chief Inspector of Schools in England, is still with me. Do you accept the point that it is unfair for all schools to be judged by the same measures when they come from different parts of the country and have very different experiences in terms of deprivation and wealth?
But they're not judged by the same measures. It's quite interesting looking at that school in Kent. And I looked at the GCSE scores, 56%, quite good. And the judgment of Ofsted was good, but it is below the national average, 56%. The reason why inspectors judged the school to be good is because we looked at the intake of the school, we looked at the starting points of the children that go to the school, and we measured the progress that those children make from those starting points to end points.
So you are focusing on added value then?
Yeah, we're focused on added value. All our judgments are based on the progress, not just the outcome, the progress that children make from starting points to end points. And we recognise that some schools are in very tough, very difficult, challenging areas, and that schools and head teachers and teachers have to work that much harder than in other areas. So we judge progress more than anything else.
Right. So do you then want to hit back at some of the criticism that has come your way from teaching unions saying that Ofsted was very demoralising for teachers in those tough areas where they were dealing with many pupils from a very low base?
Well, you know, I've been around a long time, a teacher and a head teacher in London, and I remember what standards were like in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, before Ofsted came into being in 1992. Standards were absolutely dire, and they were dire in London. And look at London now. London is doing exceptionally well. Why are schools doing much better? They're doing much better because of better leadership and better teaching, but primarily because of accountability and the accountability of Ofsted and inspection, league tables, the publication of results and so on. And it's quite interesting. You had a piece on Wales there and what's happening in Wales in terms of Brexit. The Welsh education system is tanking compared to the progress that England is making.
Why?
One of the reasons is because the Welsh government took away accountability, they took away SAT results, they didn't publish results, they took away league tables, and they're rapidly reintroducing some of those measures now, and the Welsh performance in the PISA tables is absolutely terrible. And I suspect a lot of the people in Wales are not voting for Labour because of what they did to education.
What about funding then? I mean, how much of an influence is funding from government in terms of outcomes? If the Institute for Fiscal Studies is forecasting that school spending per pupil is likely to fall by around 8% in real terms over the next few years, what will that do to outcomes and results?
Well, over the last 20 years, funding has been pretty generous to schools, and school budgets have been ring-fenced. The government, rightly, in my view...
But is that why they've done well in places like London?
Partly they've done well, but I think partly for that reason. But I think the government is right to rebalance the budget formula. If you look at somewhere like Barnsley, which is an underperforming area, a deprived area, they get 50% less funding in their secondary schools than a school in Hackney, where I was ahead some years ago. That can't be right. And there are going to be these transitional problems between one funding arrangement and another. Having said that, the government needs to keep a really weather eye on whether that 8% cut in the budget between now and...
In real terms, not cash terms.
In real terms, is having an effect on standards.
Let's leave it there. Staying with education, though, one of the policies likely to be in the Conservatives' election manifesto is the creation of more grammar schools, something our guest of the day, Michael Wilshaw, isn't very happy about. Since becoming Prime Minister, Theresa May has pushed for more grammars in England. Here she is last year explaining why.
We know that grammar schools are hugely popular with parents. We know they are good for the pupils that attend them. Indeed, the attainment gap between rich and poor pupils is reduced to almost zero for children in selective schools. And we know that they want to expand. They provide a stretching education for the most academically able, regardless of their background, and they deliver outstanding results. In fact, 99% of existing selective schools are rated good or outstanding. 80% are outstanding, compared with just 20% of state schools overall. So we help no one, not least those who can't afford to move house or pay for a private education, by saying to parents who want a selective education for their child that we won't let them have it. There is nothing meritocratic about standing in the way of giving our most academically gifted children the specialist and tailored support that can enable them to fulfil their potential.
Theresa May there, and the Conservative MP Graham Brady, who chairs the backbench Conservative 1922 committee, is here with us now. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Apart from anecdotal, what actual hard evidence is there that grammar schools help overall standards or social mobility?
I think there's a huge amount of evidence. If you look at the performance of education authorities as a whole, then of those that are the top 10 in GCSE results, 7 out of 10 are at least partly selective. At A level, at least 8 out of the top 10 are partly selective. And if you look at those local authorities which are doing best at getting children into the most challenging higher education institutions, 9 out of 10
right.
are at least
so there is hard evidence to back up the expansion of grammar schools?
Well, let's take the PISA tables. I mentioned the PISA tables a moment ago in relation to Wales and Scotland and so on. The English education, which is broadly comprehensive, I know there are some grammar schools that are broadly comprehensive, is doing better than the Northern Irish system, which has a selective, have grammar schools. If you look at a place like Buckinghamshire, and Graham will know this because we debated this issue a few weeks ago, if you look at a place like Buckinghamshire, which has a selective system, something like 54% of secondary schools which are not selective are either in special measures or require improvement. And you read across from those statistics to Kent, which has a selective system, to Sutton, to Southend, where they have grammar schools, you see those youngsters who don't go to the grammar schools doing incredibly badly in what are secondary modern schools.
Right. Well, there is the evidence that actually it does not help pupils who are on free school meals, whatever the measure that you want to use, actually raise their standards or improve their social mobility.
But Michael's concerns really about the quality of the other schools, and I think that's probably where he should be focusing his concerns. And certainly if you look at Trafford, the area that I represent, which I think probably has the best state education in the country, it's not just the grammar schools that are getting phenomenally good results, it's the high schools as well. They would be getting average results for the country even without the grammar schools.
All right, but Trafford is an affluent area. But hang on, let me just finish. Right, but let me just put some of the figures to you, because if you look at pupils on free school meals, what percentage of them are at the grammar schools in Trafford?
A relatively low percentage. It will vary across the borough.
From 2.5% in Altrincham Grammar for boys to 6% at Sale Grammar. So it's extremely low.
I was at Stretford Grammar on Friday, where it's closer to 10%. So there's a variety of different figures across the borough in different schools. But also, if you look at, and Michael mentioned this, if you look at Northern Ireland, it has 70% of children on free school meals getting good GCSE results.
Right. But why hasn't that happened? But why hasn't that happened in Trafford? I mean, you pick Stretford, all right, but as I say, 2.5% in Altrincham Grammar.
Well, we do
but hang
well
on.
in Trafford.
I mean, this is the evidence against this argument that it actually helps social mobility. I mean, the figures show that less than 3% of children in grammar schools are on free school meals, compared to 18% of children in the same area.
I'm very much in favour of grammar schools doing more to make sure they encourage people to come in, encourage people to take the test. One of the biggest reasons, I think, why there's been a move backwards in this regard in the last couple of decades is that the test is no longer taken universally. It's largely self-selecting. Now, I want far more people taking the test to make sure we get all of the children who can benefit.
So is the solution more grammar schools? Then you would help more people from backgrounds...
No, it isn't. And I mentioned this when I debated this issue with Graham some weeks ago. The Conservatives have made a big difference to standards, actually. You know, the introduction of academies and free schools, tougher testing, a tougher curriculum, assessment and so on, has made a big difference. That's why English standards, apart from Ofsted and accountability, are going up. Why now throw a spanner in the works of your own policies, actually?
I wouldn't at all. I'm very happy to take all of the plaudits that Sir Michael wants to give for Conservative education policy. But there is a fundamental point here. I think that the choice of schools, the kind of schools that should be available, should really be there for parents. I don't think it's for politicians or even for former chief inspectors of schools to decide what kind of schools should be available to people. There is real demand, there is real evidence that they work, and I think it's right that we open that up when people want them.
But they would argue they only work for a few people. The point is, would you like to see grammar schools in every county throughout England?
I would like to see grammar schools where there is demand for them. I've never said we should force a reorganisation on
Which
people.
would be middle-class parents, and they would be the ones that would get their kids into the schools, they pay for a tutor.
You're making a very big assumption there, and I think the demand...
But the proof is in the figures of the people who go to the grammar schools that currently exist.
I think that has happened because very largely the grammar schools that remain tend to be more in the more affluent areas.
Right.
What I would love to see some new state grammar schools in the big urban areas and the more deprived areas. I think that would be a really good starting point for this policy.
Would that then add to the improved standards that you're talking about?
No, I think, to tell a youngster at the age of 10, 11 that they are a success or a failure and that actually their whole future depends on what happens on one day in one test, I think is a big mistake. Bobby Seagull, I'll mention one student because I taught. Bobby Seagull was in the University Challenge and represented, he was captain of Emmanuel, was a boy I taught, came from a very poor part of southeast London. He didn't and if you discuss this with him, he didn't start to show his mettle until he was in year 8, year 9, when he was 12, 13 years old. Youngsters progress at different rates. And to say to a youngster at 10, that's it, you're going to a second-class school because you didn't pass your level,
well, of course,
is a big mistake.
Of course, nobody should be sent to a second-class school. I'm entirely open about the point at which schools select, and whether it's at 11 or whether it's at 14 or wherever it might be. That's something that we can look at. But the crucial thing here is that grammar schools are not the whole of the story. As long as the high schools are also high-performing schools, as they are in Trafford...
But if you're taking students away from potentially good schools in the same area, then you're not going to help that.
This is why I ask you to look at Trafford, whereas the performance of the high schools that drives very high standards...
But that's not reflected, as we've heard, throughout the rest of the country. When you look at areas and boroughs like Buckinghamshire, for example. So, in a way, all you are going to do is dilute the potential for those other schools.
The drive should be to raise the standard of the other schools. And the other side of the coin, which I think is critically important as well, and I'm so pleased to hear Philip Hammond in the budget raising the significance of this, the introduction of T-levels, the higher salience given to technical education as well. It's something we've been very bad at in this country for 150 years. I'm delighted that Theresa May is now moving forward both with grammar schools, where people want them, but also with a real new initiative for higher quality technical education. It's the right kind of schooling for each child.
Graham Brady, thank you very much. Now, London is home to some of the world's super rich. But for too long, according to campaigners, the capital's been a haven for corrupt individuals from overseas who buy assets here to hide their illicit wealth. A bill being debated in the Lords today aims to clamp down on corrupt money coming into the UK. It's one of the handful of pieces of legislation being pushed through before the election. But does Parliament really have the political will to take on the oligarchs? Here's Emma Vardy.
They buy luxury London property and educate their children at our most prestigious private schools. Among the capital's wealthy elite are individuals who use the proceeds of criminal activities abroad to finance a lavish lifestyle here in Britain. New legislation aims to tackle that. It was inspired by a whistleblower from Russia. Lawyer Sergei Magnitsky alleged that a circle of Russian interior and tax ministry officials had conspired in a $230 million tax fraud scheme. He uncovered evidence which appeared to show state officials had enabled vast sums to be stolen from the public purse. But he was imprisoned and allegedly beaten to death.
My lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, had been tortured and murdered in a Russian jail. We've been trying to pursue justice for him for the last 7.5 years.
$30 million allegedly from the Magnitsky case has now been traced to the UK. $41,000 was spent here at this couture wedding dress designer in Chelsea. £115,000 was paid to Harrods Estates, this luxury London property agent, and $20,000 in fees paid to this private school.
Nobody's ever been prosecuted in Russia. They've all been allowed to keep their money. Many of them have been given state honours.
Investigators say billions of pounds of assets in the UK are bought by foreign officials from corrupt regimes and even dictators. Bill Browder has campaigned to get governments around the world to take action. But it's a politically thorny issue. Imposing new sanctions here in Britain against rich Russian officials could have repercussions for the UK's relationship with Russia at the highest levels of the Putin regime.
London has been a haven for bad guys from all over the world, for human rights violators and other kleptocrats. And the reason it is because there has not been any consequence to that. Nobody's lost their assets, nobody's been arrested, or very few accounts have been frozen.
According to the National Crime Agency, as much as £100 billion of illicitly gained wealth is laundered through the UK each year. Under the current system, relatively few assets are seized. The Criminal Finances Bill will introduce unexplained wealth orders. When a person is suspected of being involved in serious crime or human rights abuses abroad, the High Court will be able to order them to explain the origin of assets that appear disproportionate to their income.
The order itself will be a very powerful investigatory tool for government. It depends on whether the government and the police in particular then use that. We've identified over 140 properties in London worth in excess of £4 billion between them that ought to be prime targets for the unexplained wealth order. But the Home Office's own impact assessment assumes that there'll be none of these orders in the first year it becomes law, and only on average 20 a year after that, recovering assets they value at just £6 million.
It's estimated the UK is only recovering a fraction of the corrupt wealth moving through its economy. So can London ever really stop being a place where rich individuals can live alternative lives and hide their past crimes?
Emma Vardy reporting there. Well, it's back to the election campaign, and Theresa May is campaigning in Wales. Our correspondent Vicky Young is following the Prime Minister on the campaign trail today and joins us now. Vicky, tell us the latest.
I think Theresa May will be coming to South Wales really to demonstrate that she believes there are no no-go areas for the Conservatives. They seem pretty upbeat here. They think they can make gains from Labour. Now, there are various reasons for that, they think. One is the issue of Brexit. Theresa May wanting to make this election about Brexit, saying she needs a mandate to negotiate a good deal. And Wales is a country that voted to leave the EU. And there's also a very sizable UKIP vote here. They polled around 14% in Wales, and the Conservatives are confident they can take back quite a lot of former UKIP voters and really harm Labour's chances.
Right. I mean, the election campaign hasn't officially started in that sense. What do you think in terms of the sort of style of Theresa May as she goes out on the campaign trail from now on?
I think it's going to be interesting as to how much she does meet voters themselves and how much she does dwell on the issue of Brexit. I think here in Wales, and South Wales particularly, her argument is going to be broader than that. She is also looking at Labour's record here, saying that they haven't delivered when it comes to the NHS, when it comes to schools. And I think she might broaden that argument to talk much more and try and appeal to working class voters, to former Labour voters, saying and coming forward with ideas about aspiration, about helping people on lower incomes. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. And even Carwyn Jones, the leader of Labour here in Wales, has admitted that they have a mountain to climb. Now, Labour don't think it's going to be totally disastrous for them here, but certainly Labour MPs are pretty concerned that the Tories could be making inroads. And if the Conservatives were to win more seats than Labour here in Wales, it would be the first time since the 1850s. Something to think about.
Yes, that is somewhat historic, to say the least. Looking at the issue of Brexit, the poll has indicated that former Labour voters who went to UKIP last time round, maybe many of those will switch their vote to the Tories. Makes it very difficult for Labour to actually appeal to voters who perhaps voted Leave in the referendum when they are still firmly Remain in Wales.
Yeah, and I think it will mean that in marginal seats, for example, that of course really does help the Tories, not just here in Wales, but in places like the South West. It will help them maybe fend off the Liberal Democrats. So the idea that Theresa May is going out around the country saying, look, I need this mandate, I need to deliver. And then you have, Labour making speeches where they say they accept the referendum result, but they do sound reluctant to go along with it wholeheartedly. That's not going to go down well in places like this that voted for Leave.
All right, Vicky Young, thank you very much. There's just time before we go to find out the answer to our quiz, Michael Wilshaw. The question was, which politician has announced they are resigning from their party and will stand as an independent candidate in an upcoming election? Tony Blair, Angela Merkel, Marine Le Pen or Nigel Farage?
That's Marine Le Pen.
It is. Well done. Thank you. That's it for today, and thank you to you for being our guest of the day. The 1 o'clock news is starting over on BBC One now, and I'll be back at 11:30 tomorrow with Andrew for live coverage of Prime Minister's Questions. Bye-bye.
was. She's trying to frame me.
We're still after you, Mara.
This is the final push. We cannot fail.
He sent you, didn't he?
You're expecting someone else?
You walk out of here, you're dead.
Line of Duty concludes Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
What do our pets need to be healthy? They can't tell you, but science can.